A lot of people in the United States are coffee drinkers. Over the last few years, a trend has been developing to introduce premium specially blended coffees known as gourmet coffees into the American market. Boston seems to have been the birthplace of this trend. In fact, major gourmet coffee merchants from other cities like Seattle, San Francisco, came to Boston, where today they are engaged in a kind of coffee war with Boston's merchants. They are all competing for a significant share of the gourmet coffee market.
It's rare to find an adult who actively still wonders what their parents think. But that isn't to say that we aren't wondering about our value in more general terms. It's just that we may, without noticing, have taken the question somewhere else, and very often, to particularly harsh modern figures of authority, media and social media. To this pitiless arena, the self-doubting person now directs all their fears of unworthiness and panicked desire for reassurance.
The major currency of our rewards system is dopamine, an important chemical or neurotransmitter. There are many dopamine receptors in the forebrain, but they're not evenly distributed. Certain areas contain dense clusters of receptors, and these dopamine hotspots are a part of our reward system.
The history of software is of course very new. And the whole IT industry is really only 67 years old, which is extraordinary, and to be so close to the birth of a major new technology, a major new discipline, is quite remarkable given where we got to in those 67 years. And the progression has been not so much a progression as a stampede, because Moore's law, the rapid expansion in the power of computing and the rapid fall of the cost of computing and storage and communications has made it feasible for information technology to move into all sorts of areas of life that were never originally envisaged.
Thanks for this opportunity to speak about Australia's engagement with Asia from the perspective of trade, and in particular to say a few words about what trade is doing in this space. And I'm particularly pleased to be addressing trade and investment, not just of course because these two things are inextricably linked, but also of course because Australia reports to Australia's first ever Minister for Trade and Investment. Asia's importance to Australia's economy is growing by the day. It is one of the most important factors to consider.
Let's say if I'm asking which source do you often use to get information? Newspaper, radio, and the survey shows 62% of the people chose internet. You might be thinking I am going to say how important the internet is, or how quickly it has changed the world for a few years. But what if I tell you this survey is conducted on the website globalandmail.com? Our answer will be different. Because the people who did this survey on a website must be frequent users of internet. This sample is a biased sample. So we have to pay attention to how a survey is conducted. I think with our linguistic training we also get all this invisible training to be authorities, to be the people who know. It is part of that process that you come out as a world authority on your chosen subject. But when we move into working with communities, we have to recognize that the communities have to be the authority in their language. Actually, A woman in the class I'm teaching at Sydney at the moment, a career woman, expressed this very nicely. Although she was talking about something else, she was distinguishing expertise from authority.
In other words, our perception of intoxication and its risks is relative. So this is the point: as you change context, perceptions will change, although the absolute level of alcohol in their system doesn't change. The study is in the journal BMC Public Health. Moore says one way to use this finding is for better city zoning. In the United Kingdom, for example, there's been a big push to put more premises that sell alcohol in the same district, in the same area. And what this does is create a concentration of drinkers. So what we might argue from this is, well, let's try to break that up a little bit.
Humans have relied on phenology since the time of hunters and gatherers. We've watched changes in seasons to know when to plant and harvest food and when to track migrating animals. Scientists observe and document seasonal changes in nature and look for patterns in the timing of seasonal events. Timing of these natural signs has remained consistent until recently. Increasing global temperature is causing rhythms of nature to shift. Bud burst, the day when a tree or plant's leaf or flower buds open, is occurring earlier in the year for some species.
While a silent pause might be interpreted as a sign for others to start speaking, a filled pause can signal that you're not finished yet. Hesitation phenomena can buy time for your speech to catch up with your thoughts, or to fish out the right word for a situation. And they don't just benefit the speaker. A filled pause lets your listeners know an important word is on the way. Linguists have even found that people are more likely to remember a word if it comes after a hesitation.
It's because the values are specified at a very thin level at the top. There are these rules and we all have to abide by just these rules. But there are lots of things about football that aren't rules specified. So Brazilian football is different from Italian football, from British football, from German football, from Spanish football. It's culturally specific, but acknowledges that there are these universal general rules to apply to everybody.
And certainly linguists, because of our training we do have expertise in certain very narrow areas of language, but we don't have the authority over what to do with that knowledge or what to do with other knowledge that the community produces. I guess for me the bottom line is languages are lost because of the dominance of one people over another. That's not rocket science, it's not hard to work that out. But then what that means is if in working with language revival we continue to hold the authority. So, what I decided to do is to run the numbers. Instead of saying typing the complete work of Shakespeare, I just run the numbers for how long would it take a monkey typing one key striker a second. To type, to be or not to be, that is the question. Right, on average how long is it gonna take my monkey friend one keystroke a second? I don't know how you think it would be. Maybe you could have a guess. Would it be less or more than 600 million years, which is the period life on Earth isn't supposed to have emerged within? And when I run the numbers, to be or not to be is the question, takes 12.6 trillion years to type.
The troubles of the individual soul. The verdict is never a reliable yes. One is never done with cycles of fear and reassurance seeking. Every time their spirits sink, which is often, the self-doubting sufferer picks up their phone and begs to know whether they have permission to go on. If this might be us, we should grow curious about, and jealous of, people who are free. They are so because someone long ago settled the question of what they were worth, and the answer has seemed solid ever since. Social media is a roar in the next valley, not a mob in their own mind.
Plants, which are kind of like biological chefs, take that sunlight, and then suck in some CO2 from the air, mix them together. They create a stored form of energy, in the form of carbohydrates such as glucose and sucrose. The process is called photosynthesis. When animals like us eat those plants, our stomachs convert that food back into energy for our own growth. Greenhouse gases are a byproduct of this process, and are released through waste. If those plants die, they decompose, and tiny microorganisms break down those carbohydrates.
Volunteers in scientific studies sometimes get compensated. The payment can be cash, a gift card, or something almost worthless. It's amazing what people will do for a lollipop when they've had a few drinks. Simon Moore is a professor of public health research at Cardiff University in the UK. And the lollipops were for people who agreed to blow into a breathalyzer, while out on a Friday or Saturday night in Wales. More than 1,800 people agreed to the exchange.
Its leaves and assess the qualities of sunlight streaming outside. Observing the timing of biological events in relation to changes in season and climate is called phenology. When you notice the daffodil buds are poking through the snow and think spring is on its way, you're using phenology. When you see leaves turn from green to red, and watch migrating birds fly past, and realize that summer is over, autumn is here, you're using phenology.
Okay, so this is the big benefit of a universal philosophy. It says it applies to everybody. Well, looks that doesn't, 205 or 206 countries in the world. And you've got something that applies to everybody. That's a bit strange, isn't it? No, says liberal theory. There are same value structures that apply to all of us. You couldn't have the United Nations without it. It couldn't tell you that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights without this idea of values that apply to all of us just because we are humans.
This illustration often used is the one that the monkeys and the typewriters. Okay, we have a monkey sitting at a typewriter, and the claim here is basically if you leave chance in time long enough, you will get life. Don't worry about it. Yes, it's as strange. Yes, it's wonderful, but leave enough matter 600 million years on Earth and you will have life. So, the monkey sitting at the typewriter, the chances are eventually he produces the complete works of Shakespeare, so what's the problem? This simulation shows what you might see. If you are orbiting a black hole, the light and position of background stars around the hole are distorted by its gravity and they seem to spin around. On the right, the constellation Orion appears to approach the event horizon, the boundary from which nothing can escape. Orion's stars look like they become separated and get spun around. For better or worse, we live in a world profoundly affected by Sigmund Freud. If I had to ask you to name a famous psychologist, the answer of most of you would be Freud. He was the most famous psychologist ever, and he had a profound influence on the 20th and 21st century. Some biographical information. He was born in the 1850s. He spent most of his life in Vienna, Austria, but he died in London, and he escaped to London soon after, retreating there at the beginning of World War II as the Nazis began to occupy where he lived. He was one of the most famous scholars ever, but he was not known for any single discovery.
In today's lecture, I'm going to talk about changes in air pollution since the middle of the last century and what has created these changes. So, by the 1950s, air pollution was very visible with frequent thick black fogs known as smogs in many large cities around the world. The main source of this pollution was from factories and it caused severe health problems. For example, a particularly severe smog in London in 1952 caused over 4,000 deaths. Obviously, something had to be done, and in 1956 a Clean Air Act was introduced in Britain. Households that cannot pay for energy or unable to power electronic learning or medical devices, keep perishable, healthy food in the refrigerator, or maintain safe body temperatures. Under conditions of extreme heat or cold, people can suffer from mental and physical health consequences, including the possibility of death. Strategies for coping with uncomfortable temperatures, such as burning trash or sitting in one's car with the heat running, can lead to tragic outcomes as well. Our research underscores the importance of public policy that targets energy insecurity and its underlying causes.
And it has such an intensive smell of old books, and we were also asked for the first time, really I was actually taken aback by the brief, we were asked, would you do please preserve the smell? It is so important to our audience. It is so important how people perceive the library. So, that was quite an important message in our research. And indeed, the smell is an important way of how we communicate with the environment. This piece of research was done by an advertising company because advertisers are so interested in how we interact with each other and the environment. And we see that the majority of people use sight obviously to interact with the environment.
This addressed the pollution from factories and the smog soon disappeared. However, as you know, these days air pollution is still a big issue. The main difference between now and the 1950s is that you can't see it, it's invisible. Also, the main source of pollution now is from cars and lorries, and although these don't produce visible signs, this air pollution is still a significant risk to health. And one of the key factors in the rise of this type of pollution is that we have all become much more vehicle dependent. There are far more cars and lorries, trains and planes than in the 1950s, and this is now the main source of air pollution around the world.
This piece of research was done by an advertising company because advertisers are so interested in how we interact with each other and the environment. And we see that the majority of people use sight obviously to interact with the environment, but on the second place, we see the smell is also very, very important.
The Western countries' women are becoming more and more reluctant to give birth to babies. However, the male status in society remains as strong as it ever has in recent years. The birth rates increased during 20th century, but it starts to decrease over these last 2 decades. In the year 2000, as an example, the birth rate remained at around 1%.
Well, it's about whether you can achieve a win-win solution, whether you can achieve economic growth which brings wealth in order to cut poverty without damaging the biodiversity. And the argument is that if you want to protect biodiversity, you have to focus on that as a goal, but if you do that, you have to run the risk of hurting the poor and you also run the risk of inconveniencing and reducing the economic growth. The Skoog is a new university-accessible musical instrument. It is designed to use by children or adults with special needs or in fact be used by anyone. It's soft, it's easy to play, it's robust and it can be customized to suit anyone's abilities. The Skoog helps students with special needs by allowing them to get involved in making music themselves. It's an instrument that they can play it and they can take ownership of and start creating their own sounds and music. Traditional instruments are the shape and size and made of the materials they are because of the sound that they need to make.
Most Americans take energy for granted. But, for many families, maintaining access to reliable and affordable energy is a persistent challenge and a significant material hardship. This is a problem referred to as energy insecurity, and it affects millions of American households each year. We have found that energy insecurity is a growing and vexing problem among low-income households, and the COVID-19 pandemic has made this problem worse. Our analysis finds that there are disparities in rates of energy insecurity across various socio-demographic groups.